Sophia Carter stepped into the Santa Clara courthouse as if she didn't belong there, or so the room seemed to think. The air was thick with the scent of polished wood and the weight of judgment. Heads turned, eyes narrowed, and whispers slithered through the gallery. To them she was an outsider, a slender black woman in a modest navy dress, her hair swept into a neat bun, her steps measured but unwavering. The judge barely glanced at her, his gaze skimming her skin tone, her calm demeanor, and dismissing her before she even spoke. But what he didn't know, what no one in that room could have guessed, was that Sophia was no ordinary woman. She was about to turn their world upside down. The courtroom was a theater of authority, its high ceilings and dark paneling amplifying every sound, the shuffle of papers, the creak of a chair, the soft cough from the gallery. Sophia felt the weight of every stare as she approached the defendant's table. Her heart thudded, not from fear, but from the familiar sting of being underestimated. She'd faced rooms like this before, where her presence was questioned before she could open her mouth. As she set her small briefcase down, her fingers brushed the worn leather, grounding her. This wasn't just another case. This was personal. In the gallery, a mix of locals and curious onlookers watched with varying degrees of interest. A man in a worn jacket scribbled in a notebook, perhaps a reporter sensing a story. A woman in a bright scarf whispered to her neighbor, her eyes flicking toward Sophia with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. The bailiff, a tall figure with a stern face, stood near the door, his gaze lingering on Sophia a moment longer than necessary. The room buzzed with unspoken assumptions, each person weaving their own narrative about the woman standing alone. Sophia's mind flickered to a memory from years ago, when she was a young law student in Atlanta. She'd been invited to observe a trial, her first real glimpse into the justice system she dreamed of serving. But as she sat in the back, a clerk had mistaken her for a defendant's relative and asked her to leave. The humiliation had burned, but it also lit a fire in her. She'd vowed then to never let anyone dismiss her again. Now, standing in this Santa Clara courtroom, that vow pulsed through her veins. She straightened her shoulders, her expression calm but resolute. The judge's bench loomed ahead, an imposing throne of oak and tradition. Behind it sat William Foster, a man whose 24 years on the bench had carved deep lines into his face and an unshakable confidence into his posture. At 63, he ruled the Orange County courthouse with the ease of someone who'd long stopped questioning his own authority. His gavel rested within reach, a symbol of his dominion. To him, Sophia was just another name on the docket, another case to dispatch before lunch. But as she met his fleeting glance, something in her steady gaze unsettled him. Just for a moment, the bailiff's voice cut through the room. Case number 4830, City of Santa Clara versus Sophia Carter, charge contempt of court. A murmur rippled through the gallery, heads craning for a better look. Sophia stood taller, her hands clasped lightly in front of her. This was no misunderstanding. This was a fight she'd been preparing for her entire career. Judge William Foster struck his gavel with the precision honed by 24 years on the bench. The sharp crack echoed through the Santa Clara courthouse, silencing the low hum of the gallery. At 63, he carried himself with the unshakable confidence of a man who had molded the Orange County judicial system into his domain. His silver hair gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and his dark robe hung like a mantle of authority. To him, the courtroom was a machine, and he was its unflinching operator. Cases in, rulings out, no time for hesitation. Yet today, a faint pressure gnawed at him. The docket was overflowing, the clock was ticking, and this woman, Sophia Carter, stood before him with a composure that felt oddly out of place. Next case, he announced, barely lifting his eyes from the stack of papers on his desk. His voice carried the weight of routine, tinged with the impatience of a man who disliked surprises. The bailiff's baritone filled the room. Case number 4830, City of Santa Clara versus Sophia Carter, charge contempt of court. William's gaze flicked briefly to the defendant, a slender black woman in a navy dress standing alone at the table. No lawyer, no visible signs of deference. His lips tightened. He'd seen her type before, or so he thought. Citizens who thought they could challenge the system without understanding its rules. Ms. Carter, he said, his tone laced with faint disdain, I see you're representing yourself today. He leaned back, scanning the citation. You were cited for contempt in Judge Larson's courtroom last week. Care to explain? His words were clipped, more a formality than an invitation. In his mind, the case was already decided. Contempt charges were straightforward: disrupt the court, pay the price. Yet as Sophia began to speak, her voice steady and measured, a flicker of irritation crossed his face. She wasn't rushing to apologize or stumble over her words. That alone set her apart. In the gallery, the court stenographer Emily Chen paused her typing. 6 years in this courthouse had taught her to read the undercurrents of a trial. William's posture, the slight tilt of his head, the way his fingers drummed lightly on the bench, signaled he'd already made up his mind. Emily's eyes darted to Sophia, noting the woman's impeccable posture and calm demeanor. Something about this case felt different. She exchanged a quick glance with Marcus Thompson, the bailiff standing near the door. Marcus, a black man with 16 years in law enforcement, shifted uncomfortably. He'd seen William dismiss defendants like Sophia before, and the pattern stirred a quiet unease in him. William's thoughts drifted for a moment, pulling him back to a case from early in his career. Nearly 2 decades ago, he'd presided over a high-profile theft trial, delivering a ruling that earned him praise from colleagues and a front-page story in the local paper. He'd felt invincible then, certain his instincts were flawless. But now, as Sophia's voice carried through the courtroom, a shadow of doubt crept in. Had he been as fair as he believed? The memory faded as he refocused, his jaw tightening. This was no time for introspection. The gallery watched in hushed anticipation. A reporter in the back scribbled furiously, sensing a story. A woman in the front row leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as Sophia spoke. The air crackled with tension, as if the room itself sensed the collision of authority and resolve unfolding before it. William cleared his throat, ready to interrupt. This case, he told himself, would be over quickly. Sophia Carter stood firm, her voice steady despite the weight of Judge William Foster's interruptions. "Your Honor, there was a misunderstanding," she began, her words clear and deliberate. The Santa Clara courthouse seemed to hold its breath, the polished wood walls amplifying the tension. William's eyes narrowed, his fingers tightening around the gavel. "Miss Carter," he cut in, his tone sharp, "the citation states you disrupted proceedings multiple times in Judge Larson's courtroom. Interruptions are not tolerated there, or here." His words carried a finality that left little room for debate, but Sophia's posture didn't waver. She took a measured breath, her hands clasped lightly in front of her. Inside, a quiet anger simmered, not at the accusation, but at the dismissal in William's voice. She'd faced this before, the assumption that she had nothing of value to say. "If I may explain," she tried again, her voice calm but insistent. William leaned forward, examining the citation with exaggerated scrutiny. "It also says you refused to identify yourself properly when asked," he said, ignoring her attempt to speak. "That doesn't sound like a misunderstanding to me." His lips curled into a faint smirk, as if the case were already closed. In the gallery, Emily Chen, the court stenographer, lifted her eyes from her machine. 6 years in the Orange County judicial system had sharpened her ability to read a room. William's clipped tone, the way he barely looked at Sophia, it was a pattern she'd seen before. Her fingers hovered over the keys, her curiosity piqued. She glanced at Daniel Ortiz, the public defender gathering his papers from a previous case. Daniel's brow furrowed as he watched the exchange, his dark eyes flickering with recognition. He'd seen William dismiss defendants like this too often, especially those who didn't fit the judge's mold of respectability. He gave Emily a subtle nod, a silent acknowledgement of the unfolding bias. Near the door, Marcus Thompson, the bailiff, shifted his weight uncomfortably. 16 years in law enforcement had taught him to spot inequities, though he rarely spoke of them. Something in William's dismissive tone toward Sophia stirred a familiar unease. His mind drifted to a memory from years ago, when he'd watched a young black defendant in another courthouse receive a harsh sentence for a minor offense. Marcus had stood silently then, his badge heavy on his chest, wondering if he could have spoken up. Now, watching Sophia hold her ground, that old regret resurfaced, urging him to pay closer attention. "Your Honor," Sophia pressed, her voice rising slightly but still controlled. "I was present in my professional capacity." William's patience visibly thinned, his hand waving dismissively. "Miss Carter, this court's time is valuable. Judge Larson cited you for disruptive behavior and failure to comply with instructions. I'm inclined to uphold the citation." A murmur rippled through the gallery. heads turning as the spectators sensed the escalating tension. A reporter in the back jotted notes, her pen moving faster now. Marcus's jaw tightened, his eyes fixed on Sophia. Emily's typing slowed, her attention fully on the exchange. Daniel slipped his notebook into his briefcase but remained seated, unwilling to miss what came next. Sophia's gaze locked with William's, unflinching. "Your Honor, if you'd allow me to clarify," she began, but Williams sighed theatrically, reaching for his gavel. "Ms. Carter, this court sees dozens of cases daily. The citation is clear. You disrupted proceedings and refused to identify yourself. I'm imposing a fine of $600 for contempt. Pay the clerk on your way out." The gavel hovered, poised to seal her fate, but Sophia's resolve held firm, a spark of defiance in her eyes. The Santa Clara courthouse fell silent, the weight of Judge William Foster's gavel still hanging in the air. The $600 fine he'd just imposed on Sophia Carter seemed to echo in the stunned quiet. A harsh penalty for a first-time contempt charge. But Sophia didn't flinch. Her eyes, steady and unyielding, met Williams with a quiet intensity that made the room feel smaller. "Your Honor," she said, her voice cutting through the stillness, "I need to clarify something for the record." Williams' hand froze on the case file, his brow furrowing. "The matter is settled, Miss Carter," he replied, his tone final as he reached for the next docket. But Sophia pressed on, undeterred. "I was in Judge Larson's courtroom as an observer for the U.S. Department of Justice," she said, her words deliberate and resonant. The gallery gasped, a collective intake of breath that rippled through the room. William's head snapped up, his eyes locking onto hers for the first time. "I am Sophia Carter, lead attorney for the Civil Rights Division's investigation into judicial practices in Orange County." The silence deepened, thick and electric, as her words sank in. She reached into her briefcase, pulling out a sleek identification badge from the Department of Justice and holding it up for all to see. A murmur erupted in the gallery, heads turning as spectators whispered to one another. Emily Chen, the stenographer, froze, her fingers poised above her machine, her eyes wide with shock. Marcus Thompson, the bailiff, stood straighter, a faint smile tugging at his lips as he processed the revelation. In the back, Sarah Wynne, a reporter for the Santa Clara Gazette, scribbled furiously in her notebook, her sharp eyes glinting with the thrill of a breaking story. The room buzzed with a new energy, the narrative shifting before their eyes. Sophia's mind flashed to a memory from her early days at law school, when a mentor, a seasoned black attorney named Dr. Evelyn Brooks, had pulled her aside after a mock trial. "Sophia," she'd said, her voice firm but warm, "justice isn't just about winning cases. It's about forcing the system to see you, to reckon with you. Never let them dismiss you." That advice had carried Sophia through countless challenges, and now, standing in this courtroom, she felt Dr. Brooks' words alive in her resolve. She lowered her badge, her expression calm but triumphant, savoring the moment she'd turn the tables. William's face remained impassive, but a faint flush crept up his neck. He cleared his throat, his voice noticeably softer. "I see," he said, taking the badge from the bailiff who had hurried forward to deliver it. He examined it closely, his fingers betraying a slight tremor. "And what exactly is the Civil Rights Division investigating in our county, Ms. or rather, Attorney Carter?" The shift in his tone was subtle but unmistakable, a crack in his armor of authority. "The investigation is confidential at this stage, Your Honor," Sophia replied, her voice smooth and professional. "But it concerns patterns of judicial discretion in sentencing and contempt citations across demographic groups." The words landed like a quiet thunderclap. Marcus suppressed a chuckle, his respect for Sophia growing. Emily's eyes darted between the judge and the attorney, sensing a shift in the room's power dynamic. Sarah Nguyen's pen flew across her page, capturing every word. William shifted in his seat, the flush deepening. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding," he said, his voice tight. "I'll dismiss the citation, of course," but Sophia's gaze didn't soften. "Thank you, Your Honor," she said, "but I'm concerned about the speed of your decision and the size of the fine without hearing my full explanation. It's precisely the kind of judicial behavior we're examining." The gallery stirred again, the weight of her words sinking in. William's jaw tightened, but for the first time, he had no reply. The Santa Clara courthouse buzzed with tension, the air thick with the aftermath of Sophia Carter's revelation. Judge William Foster sat rigid at his bench, the U.S. Department of Justice badge still in his hand. His face, usually a mask of authority, betrayed a flicker of unease, a faint flush creeping up his neck, a tightness in his jaw. The gallery, moments ago stunned into silence, now hummed with whispers, spectators leaning toward one another, piecing together the seismic shift they'd just witnessed. Sophia stood tall, her navy dress a stark contrast to the chaos she'd unleashed. Her eyes locked on William with unwavering resolve. William cleared his throat, his voice strained but controlled. "It appears there's been a misunderstanding," he said, setting the badge down carefully. "The citation is dismissed, Attorney Carter." The words felt heavy, an admission of error he rarely made in his 24 years on the bench. Inside, a wave of embarrassment washed over him, mingled with a gnawing anxiety. How had he misjudged so completely? His mind flashed to a moment early in his career when a mentor, a grizzled judge named Clara Reynolds, had warned him, "Fairness isn't just a principle, William, it's a discipline. Ignore it then." But now her words stung, a reminder of the standard he'd failed to uphold. Sophia inclined her head slightly, acknowledging the dismissal, but her expression remained firm. "Thank you, Your Honor," she said, her voice steady. "But I must raise a concern. The speed of your decision and the $600 fine, issued without hearing my full explanation, reflect the very judicial patterns we're investigating in Orange County." The gallery stirred, a low murmur rippling through the crowd. Emily Chen, the stenographer, paused her typing, her eyes wide with admiration for Sophia's boldness. Marcus Thompson, standing near the door, allowed himself a small nod, his earlier unease replaced by a quiet satisfaction. In the back, Sarah Gwynn, the Santa Clara Gazette reporter, scribbled frantically, her pen racing to capture the exchange. William's flush deepened, his fingers gripping the edge of his bench. He opened his mouth, then hesitated, aware of the room's scrutiny. "Perhaps we should discuss this in my chambers," he suggested, his tone softer, almost conciliatory. The offer was a retreat, a way to escape the public spotlight, but Sophia shook her head, her gaze unwavering. "I believe transparency serves justice, Your Honor," she replied. "I'd prefer the citation's dismissal be formally recorded here, in open court." Her words were polite but unyielding, a challenge wrapped in professionalism. The spectators leaned forward, their whispers growing louder. Emily exchanged a glance with Marcus, her raised eyebrows signaling her surprise at Sophia's audacity. Sarah Gwynn's eyes gleamed, sensing a story that would dominate tomorrow's headlines. William exhaled slowly, his composure fraying. "Very well," he said, his voice tight. He struck his gavel once, the sound sharp and final. "Citation dismissed. This court will recess for 15 minutes. As the gallery erupted into hushed conversation, William rose, his robes sweeping behind him, and retreated to his chambers, the weight of Sophia's words trailing him like a shadow. 4 months after the courtroom confrontation, Judge William Foster sat in his chambers at the Santa Clara courthouse, a stack of reports spread across his desk. The data was undeniable. Disparities in contempt citations across racial groups in Orange County, with fines varying widely. His fingers traced the numbers, a heavy knot forming in his chest. For 24 years, he'd prided himself on being a fair judge, but the evidence told a different story. Shame mingled with resolve. He couldn't ignore this any longer. He leaned back, the weight of his robe feeling heavier than ever. In the courtroom, William had returned to the bench after the recess with a changed demeanor. "Before we proceed," he announced, his voice steady but softer, "I'm initiating a review of all contempt citations issued in this court over the past 6 years. I'll work with the administrative office to establish a monitoring system for judicial discretion metrics." The gallery stirred, spectators exchanging surprised glances. Emily Chen, the stenographer, paused her typing, her eyes wide with astonishment. Marcus Thompson, the bailiff, stood taller, a quiet pride in his stance. Sarah Gwynn, the Santa Clara Gazette reporter, wrote furiously, her article later headlining, "Orange County Judge Pledges Reform After Federal Prosecutor's Challenge." William's mind had been haunted by that day. He recalled a conversation with Laura Bennett, his secretary, who'd hesitantly presented the citation statistics a month earlier. "There's a significant disparity, sir," she'd said, her voice cautious. He'd brushed it off then, too busy, too comfortable. Now, facing the truth, he felt exposed, humbled. "I've been complacent," he admitted to Laura, who nodded diplomatically. "You're addressing it now," she replied, placing a new report on his desk. In the gallery that day, Daniel Ortiz, the public defender, had approached Sophia Carter. "Attorney Carter, I'm Daniel Ortiz," he said, extending a hand. "I've tracked disparities in Williams' courtroom for years. Contempt citations are 3 times higher for my Black and Latino clients." Sophia handed him her card, her eyes sharp. "I'd like to see your data, counselor." Daniel's thoughts drifted to a client from years ago, a young Latino man fined heavily for a minor courtroom disruption. The memory of that injustice had fueled Daniel's quiet record-keeping, and now, with Sophia's backing, he saw a chance for change. Sarah's article sparked community discussion. With residents praising the court's new transparency, William continued his reforms, requesting a Judicial Ethics Committee mentor to observe his practices for 7 months. Emily and Marcus exchanged hopeful glances as the courtroom atmosphere shifted, cases now handled with more care. Sophia and Daniel began collaborating on a community justice initiative, their data shaping new accountability frameworks. As William reviewed the latest metrics, showing improved consistency in rulings, he felt a cautious optimism. The road was long, but the first steps were taken, driven by a truth he could no longer ignore. 4 months after the courtroom reckoning, Judge William Foster stood on the steps of the Santa Clara courthouse, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the plaza. The air was warm, carrying the faint scent of eucalyptus from nearby trees. Around him stood a diverse group: Sophia Carter, the Black federal prosecutor; Daniel Ortiz, the Latino public defender; Emily Chen, the Asian stenographer; Marcus Thompson, the Black bailiff; and Sarah Nguyen, the Vietnamese reporter from the Santa Clara Gazette. They were headed to the community center across the street, where residents of Orange County waited to share their experiences and shape a fairer judicial system. William's thoughts drifted as he walked, his robe replaced by a simple suit, his gavel left behind. For 24 years, he'd believed himself a just judge, his rulings guided by instinct and experience. But Sophia's challenge had forced him to see the blind spots in his pride, the data, the patterns, the stories. They'd humbled him. Yet, in that humility he found purpose. The reforms he'd initiated, reviewing 6 years of contempt citations, implementing oversight, and inviting a mentor for 7 months, were showing results. His rulings were more consistent, his courtroom more open. Still, he knew the work was far from done. Sophia, walking beside him, felt a quiet pride. Her mind wandered to her first day at law school, when she'd stood in a lecture hall, heart pounding, vowing to fight for justice, no matter the cost. That promise had brought her here, to this moment, where her presence had sparked change. She glanced at Daniel, who was discussing the community justice initiative they'd launched. 20 judges from neighboring counties have joined our bias training, he said, his voice bright with optimism. The Department of Justice is eyeing our accountability framework as a model. Sophia nodded, her resolve strengthened by the memory of her younger self's ambition. At the community center, the room buzzed with voices. Residents, young and old, from varied backgrounds, shared stories of their encounters with the courts. William listened, his face etched with focus, occasionally jotting notes. Emily and Marcus, instrumental in organizing the event, moved through the crowd, ensuring everyone felt heard. Sarah Gwynn stood near the back, her photographer capturing the scene, a judge, a prosecutor, a defender, and court staff united with the community. Her latest article, Santa Clara's Judicial Turnaround, had praised the reforms, quoting William, "Justice works best when it serves everyone equally. It took a federal prosecutor to show me what I'd missed." As the sun dipped lower, bathing the plaza in golden light, William addressed the group. "That day in court was humbling," he said, his voice steady. "I failed to uphold the standard of fairness, but true justice demands accountability, especially from those who wield its power." The crowd nodded, some clapping softly. Sophia met his gaze, a silent acknowledgement of their shared journey. The photograph Sarah's colleague took that day, of the diverse group on the courthouse steps, would grace the Gazette's front page. It captured a moment of hope, a testament to what could be achieved when biases were confronted and bridges built. As they left the center, William glanced at Sophia. "Thank you," he said quietly. She smiled, the weight of her vow from years ago now lighter. Sometimes, she thought, Justice began with forcing the system to see clearly and then daring it to change. This story teaches us that true justice demands accountability and courage to confront bias, even in those who wield power. Sophia's stand and William's transformation remind us change begins when we dare to see clearly and act. What's your take on this journey? Share your thoughts in the comments, like this video and spread it to spark discussion. Subscribe to True Justice Stories for more tales of truth and reform. Thank you for joining us. Your support fuels these stories, inspiring a fairer world for all. The story of Sophia Carter and Judge William Foster teaches us that true justice demands accountability. It begins with confronting our biases, listening to those we've overlooked, and working together for change. One moment of courage in a Santa Clara courtroom sparked a movement, proving that fairness isn't a given, it's a choice we make daily. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below with your thoughts on justice, and subscribe for more tales that challenge the system. Thank you for watching, engaging, and believing in a fairer world.